We're going to start with Senator Roberts.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for appearing again today. Returning to the Australian National Audit Office report, quote, the title, Governance of Climate Change Arrangements, which found that you are, quote, unable to demonstrate the extent to which specific Australian government policies and programs have contributed or are expected to contribute towards total emissions reductions, emissions meaning carbon dioxide from human activity. End of quote. Last estimates, you said you disagreed with that, yet you agreed with all 5 recommendations from the auditor, didn't you?
Catherine Geiger, Acting Division Head for Climate Change Policy, Adaptation and Risk. Yes, we did agree with all of the recommendations in the report.
So you say, well, let's continue. The Audit Office responded to you disagreeing and said the Department of Climate Change, Energy, Environment and Water, did I get that right, does not have a single structured plan or strategy that links activities being undertaken to the, this is a quote, to the achievement of emissions reduction targets. As outlined in paragraph 2.26, DCCEEW's monitoring of the progress of climate and energy-related work does not include an indication of what contribution measures will make towards emissions reduction targets. Because of this, DCCEEW is unable to demonstrate the impact of its work on climate change targets as set out in paragraph 2.28 and in recommendation number 1. That's the end of the A&O statement. Do you still maintain that you can demonstrate the specific, quantifiable effects your policies have had on the reduction of carbon dioxide from human activity, despite what the Audit Office said?
Senator, we have a range of ways that we measure the impacts of our different climate change initiatives towards the emissions targets. Ms Rowley might be able to talk through the specifics that balance both the forward projections and the contributions that particular initiatives might make to our targets, as well as annual updates of how our emissions are tracking.
Yeah, thank you, Senator Kath Rowley, Head of the Emissions Reduction Division. Senator, as we discussed at the hearing in February, we do have a range of ways that the government tracks the progress towards its emissions reduction targets and quantifies the impact of its most important emissions reduction policies and measures. In our February hearing, I talked you through some of the specific findings from our 2023 emissions projections report, which is one of the key ways that we track progress towards our target.
Excuse me,
and explain
progress in implementation with a projections report.
So we track both progress to date in our National Inventory Report, which is published every year and reports on Australia's greenhouse gas emissions from all sources across the economy, and that's a backwards look. And our emissions projections look at, based on a range of assumptions, looking forward, what do current policies deliver in terms of our expected emissions for the future, and they run out to 2035.
So are they, just clarification there, are they actual impacts of the reduction of carbon dioxide from human activity or just reductions in carbon dioxide from human activity?
So it covers all greenhouse gases, not just carbon dioxide, and the projections include detail of the projected impact of some of our major emissions reduction policies and measures. Right,
that doesn't answer the question. What would be the impact of those projected decreases and what is the impact of the reductions today? Do we see any difference in temperature? Do we see any difference in rainfall, snowfall, storm severity, frequency, duration, droughts, floods, sea levels? What are the specific impacts?
So if you talk about the impacts of Australia's greenhouse gas emissions on the global climate, obviously the global climate and the observed impacts of climate change are a function of Australia and all other countries' greenhouse gas emissions, and the key reports that we refer to in our work and draw on are things like the IPCC assessment reports, as well as work domestically by groups like CSIRO and the Bureau of Meteorology that looks at the impacts of climate change to date, which, as I said, the cumulative effect of global greenhouse gas emissions. It is, I think, rather more difficult to attribute any change in the tonnes of emissions from Australia to specific changes in the global climate, not least because it is a cumulative effect. But it is also very important to note that the cumulative effect of climate change is reflective of global greenhouse gas emissions, and with the reduction in global greenhouse gas emissions, the projected impacts and over time the observed impacts of climate change will be less, and Australia is contributing to that as part of the global action on climate change.
Thank you. It sounds like ANAO was right. The Australian National Audit Office was absolutely correct. You cannot measure the impact of what you're doing.
Senator Roberts, I think that the ANAO was particularly interested in drawing connections between Australia's policies and measures and Australia's greenhouse gas emissions. And as I said, our emissions reports, both backward-looking through the inventory and forward-looking through the projections, do seek to quantify the impact of policies and measures on Australia's emissions. And we also, as I said, that they're just one of many things that we do to track the implementation and progress. Specific policies and measures, when they're out for consultation, include analysis of the likely impacts on greenhouse gas emissions. So, for example, recent consultations on the new vehicle efficiency standard included specific analysis of their likely impact on greenhouse gas emissions.
Excuse me, that's not what I'm after. We've already discussed that you can project reductions in carbon dioxide, but you can't tell me what the impact will be. So you claim you can. So can you please provide the specific, quantifiable effect of each of your policies on notice, since you claim you have that? So let's have that, please.
Senator, I think that perhaps you're making a different point to the ANAO's. The ANAO was interested in the impact on Australia's greenhouse gas emissions from our policies and measures, and you're asking about the impact of Australia's mitigation action on global climate change. Is that correct?
No, I'm saying what is the impact on climate factors like temperature, like snowfall, like rainfall, like drought severity, frequency, duration, specific things that we've been told the world's going to come to an end if these things are going to happen. I would like to know the impact of your specific reductions on those factors in climate.
As I said, those are intermediated through global emissions and global action, and we can certainly provide, as we have in the past, information about both the global outlook and the impact of global reductions in emissions.
No one anywhere in the world, Ms. Rowley, has provided the specific quantified effect of carbon dioxide from human activity on any temperature on any climate factor. No one ever.
Senator
That's the
Roberts,
fundamental
I'm
basis
not
for
sure
policy.
that that's correct.
Well, if you can prove me wrong, I'd love to have that. If you can take that on notice, that would be great. Specific effect of carbon dioxide from human activity on climate factors, such as air temperature, tropospheric temperature, stratospheric temperature, heat content of the air, heat content of the ocean, heat exchange, storm frequency, severity, duration. And you pick them. You pick them.
We accept the international science of the impact
I know you do. That's what bothers me.
Emissions, greenhouse gases on climate change. We can provide on notice further background on that, but the premise is that we accept.
Ms. Geiger, I'm not interested in further background. I'm interested in hard, specific numbers that should be and must be the basis of any policy that's going to gut our energy sector. The specific, quantified effect of carbon dioxide from human activity on any climate factor. That's what I want to see. I'm happy to take it on notice. So let's move on to the freedom of information that I put in. The request was LEX 76280 in relation to the Powering Australia tracker. You redacted a single measure on page 6 of that document. What's that measure, please?
Senator, I understand that the Freedom of Information request was about the tracker. My colleague Ms Mitchell might have that information to hand.
The one that was redacted on page 6.
Good morning. So Nicole Mitchell, Grant Chair, Climate Change Policy. Senator, we've provided the response that explains why that line was redacted. And so in more detail. So it said that it's redacted on the basis of Cabinet confidence.
Really? Can you take on notice then, please, to provide a table with all of the policies in the Powering Australia tracker detailing the cost of each of them by year over the past 3 years and their budget over the forwards?
We can take that on notice.
Thank you. Let's move to fuel security. We covered the minimum stockholding obligation for petrol, diesel and jet fuel at some length last Senate estimates. You gave to me on notice in SQ 24 000046 that the refineries may also report crude oil and unfinished stock as liquid fuel. Do you have a breakdown of how much of the reported stockholding is actually finished liquid fuel versus crude oil, not projected conversion of existing crude to future petrol, diesel or jet fuel, but the actual quantities of the four measures as it exists now?
So just so Paula Savakis, Division Head, Gas and Liquid Fuels, Senator. So just so I'm really clear, so what you're asking for the MSO obligation, how much of the crude oil do we count as petrol, jet fuel and diesel? Yes,
and can you provide to me, yes, but can you also provide to me the actual amounts right now of crude oil as it is, jet fuel as it is, petrol as it is and diesel as it is, not projected conversions of crude oil into those things?
I will have to take on notice the projected for crude oil into those things because the MSO does allow for the reporting obligations to effectively say I've got a bucket of crude oil and I will be converting X amount of it into through their normal operations. How much of that is going to be diesel? How much of that is going to be jet fuel, etc. So I would have to take on notice how much of the crude is crude, if you will, and how much is fuel.
That'd be good. You've explained previously how there's the domestic minimum stockholding obligation for petrol, diesel, jet fuel put in place by the government. Then there's the International Energy Agency agreement for 90 days of crude oil. Last estimates, you told me we were at 55 days for International Energy Agency days for crude oil. What's the latest figure for that? And is all of that stock in Australia's exclusive economic zone here?
So the actual figure of that today, which is the last report of March 2024, is 53 days, Senator. And that figure it captures all of the things. So just let me describe, might be helpful if I describe what's captured in that. So it's crude oil as crude oil. It's diesel, petrol and jet fuel. It also includes other refined products. So, for example, it would include the oil that you would put into your car is included under the definition provided to us by the IEA. It's the fuel. It's those stocks that are on land in Australia and in our domestic waters. But importantly, that's the difference between the IEA days and the MSO calculation. Is it does not include the product that's in our EEZ, just the product that's in Australian waters or physically in Australia.
So, is there any double counting then?
No, Senator. There's no double counting because there's a difference between a vessel that is in Australian waters, how it's included in the IEA days, and how and stock that is in the EEZ that is counted in the MSO days. It might be also useful, Senator, if you indulge me, to explain the difference of the measures that we have in place, just so that you can get an idea of what we use it for. So, as I described, the IEA days are one single calculation of all of the fuel and fuel products as defined by the IEA. We also have our consumption cover days, and they're the days that we report every month publicly, and you'll find those on our website. And that is a measure of how long the stock will last. So that gives us a really good indication of what we've got every month and how long, based on average consumption, that will last, and that's all publicly available. And then we also have the MSO, which is slightly different because what that tells us is or the purpose of that measure is to set that minimum stock holding obligation to give us the insurance policy of making sure, from our perspective, how much fuel, liquid fuels and things we should have in Australia should there be a market disruption. So the purpose of each of those reportings is slightly different, which is why what goes into them is, what we count and how we count them is also slightly different because they have different purposes.
Okay, thank you. I look forward to the numbers that you're going to give me. Our strategic reserve...
Senator Roberts, if you finish that line of questioning, we will need to rotate.
Okay, just one more question on strategic reserve. You told me at last Senate estimates that Australia has sold all of the oil reserves in the United States Strategic Reserve.
Correct.
That was 1.7 million barrels nearly 2 years ago in June 2022. That hasn't been reported anywhere, as I understand it.
No, Senator, I believe it was publicly reported. I'll be happy to table that report.
Okay, thank you. Did anyone at the department announce that the 1.7 million barrels had been sold?
Like I said, I believe it was. I'm happy to correct if my evidence is wrong, but I do believe it was made public at the time.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Senator